Hello, everyone. I am James Snell. Here to talk a little bit about kind of what's going on in the Node ecosystem, the JavaScript ecosystem, now the Deno and Bun and Workers and all kinds of things ecosystem. It's important for us to understand kind of where where all of this is going. So a little bit of background on me. Appreciate the guys giving a little bit there, but I have been involved with Node since about 2015. I'm responsible for a few things that have been added to Node, things like the standard URL parser, web streams, web crypto, blah blah, that kind of stuff. I am a principal engineer on the Cloudflare Workers team, where I kind of tend to focus primarily on the open source workerd part of that runtime, which is kind of the core bits that run the JavaScript there. I'm also the co-chair of the Web Interoperable Runtimes community group, or WinterCG. I believe we just had a talk from Luca Casanata, who is the other co-chair of that group. And lots of other open source and standards work in these ecosystems throughout the years. So I'm going to be talking a bit through some of the history of Node, and there's some parts of this I'm going to kind of go pretty quickly through, because I kind of want to try to leave some room for questions at the end. But Node's been around for a long time, right? It was announced back in 2009. Kind of had these early years of a lot of kind of experimentation and growth and all these kinds of things, right up until about 2013. Then it started to falter a little bit. It had to do with the corporate governance of the project and that kind of thing. So we ended up with the IOJS fork. That was kind of the first branch in the ecosystem that emerged. And it was a pretty tumultuous time for Node. There was a lot of kind of infighting with the project. It didn't really, it was kind of losing its feet and kind of where it wanted to go. And when I got involved with Node in 2015, I was actually told by active maintainers at that time that Node was done. It didn't need any new features. It didn't need any new APIs. It just needed to be maintained so that things just didn't break from that point forward. It did not need to act like a browser. Didn't need new APIs, anything. The mantra there consistently was small core, small core, small core, right? Well, we kind of worked through that community drama. IOJS was renamed Node. We merged all the stuff that was happening in the main Node branch at that time into IOJS, renamed IOJS Node, and just kind of kept moving forward from there. Now, it still took several years, though, before we started seeing other things like Deno and Bun come out. During that time, we had things like WinterCG URL parser. We had performance API, ESM, promise-based APIs. A bunch of these standard APIs really started to come out in the runtime itself. And it was really only after we were able to deal with that community drama that we got to that point. But you see here, like in the middle, Deno comes out. Right? Almost 9 years after Node had already been there. And with Deno brought a whole other set of considerations, right? And if we start taking a look at this, we have this challenger, right? 2018. We'll talk a little bit kind of what Deno brought to the table in a few minutes. But then, like, now we're in 2023 and we have another challenger, and there's another thing there that developers can use, and we have even others like Cloudflare Workers, right? There's WinterJS, which is another runtime that was just announced last week. What we start seeing, I mean, these aren't forks of Node, right? These are completely, wholly different runtimes, also running JavaScript code that have their own sets of features, their own benefits and pros and cons relative to each other. But they weren't just like what we saw before with IOJS. They weren't just forks of Node, variations of Node. It's a completely different thing, right? So more non-browser JavaScript runtimes means more choice for developers. And this is just what it comes down to. I've had lots of people ask, over the past few years, is Node doomed because of Deno? Is Node doomed because of Bun? And there's been some back and forth, the typical Twitter drama on this stuff. But the answer is absolutely not. I mean, this isn't a zero-sum game. All of this competition, these additional runtimes, just mean that developers have more options. It means they have a choice of features. They can find the platform that works the best for them. If you need something that goes really, really fast, hey, Bun's there. If you need something that is long-term stable, you still have Node, right? So it just means more choice, and this is just better for everyone going forward. But if you're like looking back on it, there's another benefit here. For years, the ecosystem has been entirely at the whims and opinions of Node core contributors, folks like myself that are actually working on Node, because those decisions that drive the API surface were made entirely by the Node core contributors. Small core philosophy, this batteries not included approach was pushed by Node and impacted, and when I say impacted, I really mean blocked, the adoption of language features like promises and ESM, the use of standardized APIs like URL, web streams, and tooling integration, things like test runners, right? You had this for years and years. No, we can't add that. The ecosystem can do that. No, we're not going to add this because that's just a browser thing. And I know that myself and others that are active in the project the past few years have been fighting this against this mantra for years, just to try to get the project to understand it's not done. It needs to continue to evolve. It needs to continue to move with the developer base that is actually using that runtime, or else it's going to become irrelevant, and folks will stop using Node. Node will die, but not because anything else killed it, but because Node as a project stops being responsive to the ecosystem that it serves. So having these additional options is great because it kind of forces that ecosystem to evolve and forces Node to evolve right along with it. So this is a good thing. This Node is not a browser. It shouldn't act like one. It's a mantra we've heard for years. Personally, I think it's a bit BS. No, it's not a browser, but it still does a lot of the same things a browser does, and there's no reason for it to do those things differently. So let's talk about, when Deno came in, what did it bring to the table, right? Deno initially comes out the door, looks at Node and says, we don't want to be like that. We want to be standards based. We actually want to act more like a browser. We want to have these standards built in from day one. Okay. But that's not all, right? It also said, it looked at all that ecosystem of tooling, all the things that Node rejected initially, and says, no, we don't want to do that in the core project. That should be the ecosystem thing. Looked at that and said, well, that's really complicated. That's hard to get all those pieces correct. So let's just build them all in, get much more opinionated on how these things should work, simplify how all this should work. And what we end up seeing is that the ecosystem improved, right? Ecosystem was like, wow, this actually does help. Going back to thing, Node, Deno, and none of these are going to kill Node. It's never. But the impact that Deno did have in the ecosystem, and this is very important, is it proved that the small core mindset, runtime specific APIs, and the batteries not included approach was not what the ecosystem wanted or needed, right? And Node, if it wants to continue to be relevant, has to embrace this this philosophy as well. It really needs to start opening itself up to bundling these tools or making things faster and that kind of thing. All right. And I'm just going to point. There's a comment in there talking about whether the pronunciation is Deno or Deno. Originally it was Deno, and then later the company changed it to Deno officially, so it is Deno. So, all right. So now we also have Bun, pronounced Bun. It focuses on being compatible with Node first, only a whole lot faster, and also has the integrated tooling. There are standardized APIs in there, but those are actually at a lower priority than the Node performance and the Node compatibility and the performance, right? The popularity of Bun now proves that we need performance, which was kind of Node's thing before, but also improved developer experience. Those are both still very important to the ecosystem. We can't sacrifice one for the other, right? They do go hand in hand. It's another thing that Node needs to make sure that that they're paying attention to. But this choice does come with a catch. There is a very real risk of runtime lock-in. And what I mean by this, I mean, if you look at Deno and you look at Bun, you see that they have like this Deno global, right? Or the Bun global. And on these things are Bun and Deno specific APIs that only work in those environments. Node has its specific APIs, right? But both, Deno and Bun are now implementing those, right? But if you end up using all of these Deno objects, all these Bun, this Bun object, then your code's only going to work in those environments, right? It's or you end up having to special case your code, like if Deno then this, if Bun then this, if Node then this. Now you can, because of the compatibility layers, to an extent, write some code that'll work in all of these environments as long as you write it to Node's point of view, right? Those Node APIs are not standard, right? You're using Node style callbacks, you're using Node event emitter, using Node streams, right? So you're still actually locked into a particular runtime's point of view, right? Ideally, what we would have are standard APIs that work across everything, so you're not locked into anything unless you have a really good reason, right? We'll talk about some of those reasons in a minute. All right, so let's look at a case study, opening a socket. Something simple. You want to connect to a database or a TCP connection, right? Is it possible to use standardized APIs for this? Well, right now, no. Node, Deno, and Bun all have their own APIs for connecting a socket. Now, Deno and Bun do support Node's net, right? But again, that's locking you into Node's way of doing it. But it's complicated, right? If you wanted to open a socket, you have to sit there and do all of these things. You have to special case all this code if you want it to work consistently. And one of the fun facts, if you look at Node's TLS connection, it accepts 49 different configuration options just in the initial call to TLS connect. And we have no idea how many of those options are actually used. That Node API, socket API, is actually incredibly complicated. All right. So to be honest, emulating that may not actually be the best approach. Cloudflare Workers, a couple of years ago, we said, hey, we want to implement a TCP TLS socket API. Which one should we use? Well, part of the discussion was, hey, let's use the standard one. Well, which one is the standard? There is no standard socket API. We could go off and implement Node. We've started implementing a Node compat layer. But like I said, that API is incredibly complicated. And I'm not particularly thrilled with going in and implementing that entire API surface area just to open a socket connection. But there was no standard, right? There is no standard. And it comes out initially, there wasn't a venue for us to actually go talk to Deno and Bun and all these other runtimes about having a standard. What WG doesn't care because they only care about web browsers. We needed a venue to get all of these non-browser runtimes on the same page, moving forward. So that didn't exist. So we created WinterCG, right? And the whole basic premise of WinterCG is no matter which JavaScript runtime you're using, you'll generally end up needing the same fundamental API primitives. So things for like URL parsing, serialization, text decoding, whatever, right? It makes no sense for different JavaScript runtimes to do the same sets of things in different ways, right? Which is kind of where we were going, with having these runtime specific APIs, right? And it makes no sense to use a runtime specific API when there is a standard, unless you have a good reason. All right, so let's look at another example. I'll get back to sockets in just a second, but this is a case that just came up, here in the past few weeks with the Node. So Window Navigator is a browser API, and I think some people have different opinions of this, whether it's a good API or not. It doesn't matter. Folks have been using it for years as a check to see, am I running in a browser or am I running in Node? And the check has always been if Navigator even exists, right? But this check no longer works because Navigator exists in Deno, it exists in Bun, it exists in Workers, it exists in now in Node. So if you're just relying on this if Navigator check to determine, it's going to be completely unreliable at this point. And the reason is you can't reliably judge based on the absence of something, whether you're in the right environment. All right, so WinterCG came up with a recommendation. Well, we use Navigator user agent, right? Which is implemented in all these runtimes now. So, if you're in Node, Navigator user agent will give you Node 21. Now, you're using Node 21 and Deno, right? It's there. Bun, it's there. This gives you a very reliable way of determining which one of these environments you're in. So if you do find yourself needing to kind of special case code for different environments, you can do so very reliably now, right? Now, if Navigator is undefined, it's probably a node version lower than 21. But you still don't want to just depend on that lack of that being there, just in case we backport it. You want to look specifically for something that is there proactively. So process.version, see if that says node. That's how you'd want to make that determination reliably. But there are other recommendations that the things that WinterCG recommends, right? There's a whole set of APIs that WinterCG basically says should exist in all JavaScript runtimes. Doesn't matter which one they are, right? And this list was compiled by the things that are actually implemented in those lists. It's not, it's not a speculative thing. These are APIs that actually do exist in Node, Deno, Bun, Workers, WinterJS, which is a new runtime, not affiliated with WinterCG, but it was just announced. All these APIs are there, right? So if you need URL parsing, use the standard API. If you need streams, use the standard API, right? Those are available. And it's a set of simple rules for runtimes. Right? If there is a standard API in this list, use it before adding a runtime specific alternative. Runtime specific APIs are okay, but should not be the preferred or the default. If you think you need to introduce a new API, stop and consider whether it's something specific to the runtime or applicable to all the runtimes, right? And if it's a general problem, work with the WinterCG to incubate a new standard that all of the runtimes can agree on, right? Or at least let people know what you're doing so that if other runtimes are having similar conversations, maybe they can do it in the same way, in a similar way, right? It doesn't have to be an official standard, right? As long as everyone agrees to do it roughly the same way, right? And even if you do have a runtime specific API for something, like say, hey, this way is much faster than the standard, right? You should still also implement the standard API. You should still have that available for all the module developers to actually use, right? Now, for those of you that are writing these libraries, writing these modules, you should always prefer the standard APIs over a runtime specific API, unless you have a really good reason. I keep saying this unless you have a really good reason. Performance counts as a really good reason, right? The web platform APIs like web streams and web crypto are not designed to be fast. They are not, if you follow the spec exactly, they're actually quite a bit slower than, say, node streams or, some of the mechanisms Bun has for optimizing connections and that kind of thing. So if you need that raw performance, then use those optimized APIs, right? But you realize you're going to sacrifice some portability, right? But if you don't need that, performance, if you don't need that, then err on the side of being portable so you don't lock yourself in to one environment and make life difficult for you down the road. Let's go back to sockets for a second. Okay, so WinterCG is currently incubating what we hope will become a new standard across these various runtimes. When I say standard, I don't necessarily mean officially stamped standard like the way HTML is or whatever else. When I say standard, I mean everybody's, hopefully everybody will agree to do it this way. And we have a spec draft up there. It's draft. It's continuing to evolve. And it's a very simple API. And instead of having Bun Connect or Deno Connect or Net Connect, we just have a global connect, similar to what we have. So we're having global fetch. It would accept an options object there, but for now that's pretty minimal. I decided to skip it here. It's not the 49 different options that Node allows. We're talking like maybe 4 or 5 options. Uses web streams for the reading and writing side, and it's promise based. This is essentially the whole functional API right here. Very, very simple, very intentionally simple. But again, if you need raw performance, it's actually better to use runtime specific APIs because web streams themselves, some implementations of them are faster than others, but as a whole, web streams are slower than things like a node stream. Right. It has just to do with the way that the standard uses the microtask queue and promises and that kind of thing. Right. But if you need portability, use this new, hopefully to be standardized API. We do have an implementation of this natively in Cloudflare Workers. There is a polyfill implementation for Node Bun, and Deno that is actively being developed. I'm actually going to be talking about this at NodeConf next week, and it'll be a recorded talk. So you can look at the talk if you want to learn more about this API and the polyfill and see a demo of it working. But we do have it working across these runtimes. It's the same API. So very excited about that. So to sum up, I'm going to do a quick time check on myself. Giving plenty of time for questions on here. And I really hope to get some good questions. If not, I'll just keep talking for the rest of the time. To sum up, using the WinterCG minimum common web platform, I know it's a mouthful, just just the common minimum. When use that whenever you want to write portable code. Don't let yourself get locked in to just doing things the Node way. Don't get yourself locked into just doing things with Deno specific APIs. Seek out opportunities to use these standards, and it's more than it's not a purity thought. It's a, hey, if I want to move this code base from Node to Bun someday, right? What's kind of am I going to have an easier time doing that using standard APIs that are not specific to one runtime, or am I going to have an easier time if I'm just writing to a standard API that works consistently across both, right? And without worrying about actually what runtime I'm actually in. Okay. Use it if you do have to special case code, Navigator user agent, right? Now in Node, adding Navigator in Node 21, it as a global right at the start kind of broke some code. We're kind of evaluating. We might for Node 21, we might put that behind a flag and make it a default global in Node 22. It's a conversation that's still happening, but Node being kind of resistant to breaking things, we're being a little cautious. But just in general, use Navigator user agent if you want to know which environment that you're in. One topic I didn't touch just because of lack of time, use ESM. I didn't talk about this. It's time to do it. Start migrating away from CommonJS. You may love CommonJS. Again, doesn't really matter. ESM is the standard that's going to work across all the runtimes, right? It goes back to this thought of not locking yourself into one model, right? ESM is the one that is, pretty much guaranteed to exist in all these other environments in a consistent way. There's lots of problems with Node ESM still. I get it. I understand. Lots of people, how that process has gone, but it is time to start making that migration. And then resist runtime lock-in. Avoid using these runtime specific APIs when there is a standard alternative. This is a mantra that I'll be like just chanting this whenever I get the opportunity. If there's not a standard API and there should be one, ask for it. Again, unless you need your code to be really fast or you need some feature that the standard doesn't have. But if that's the case, maybe go and request that it's added to the standard. So that is it. I mean, I know I went through that really fast. Like I said, I wanted to give time for questions. If folks have specific questions around WinterCG or kind of what's happening with Node, or any other directions that we have.
Okay, that was a really cool talk, and I actually asked Paul to join as well because we come from ecosystems that potentially, like, I come from the .NET ecosystem, which the concept of multiple runtimes really is kind of foreign to us. We do have things like WebAssembly and Mono to some degree, but generally when we think .NET, we just think .NET, right? Like, Paul, Python, does it have multiple runtimes? Like, what's your experience there?
Yeah, this was a part that really perked up for me in watching this. Python's old. And over the years, it's had small, medium, and big attempts at other runtimes. There is what's called CPython, which is the first among equals. But there was a Java implementation called Jython, which got a lot of work and had some really interesting features in it, like a solution to the #1 migraine in the world of Python. And it didn't get a lot of uptake. There was IronPython, and maybe I say there was, and then there wasn't, and then there was again. And it was a CLR implementation. Didn't get a lot of uptake. There is a Python written in Python called PyPy, which is like just in time, all that stuff.
Right.
And once it's warmed up, it's a good bit faster and uses a lot more memory. And then, I can name some other things as well. There's MicroPython that's intended to run on teeny tiny little devices, kind of like TinyGo. Maybe in the world of WebAssembly, there will be some other Pythons that are boutique-y, but nobody ever displaced the king.
Yeah. So, I guess like the question out of just hearing Paul and me coming from kind of the .NET world, like, how do you think all these runtimes balance? There's obviously competition between all these runtimes for various reasons, right? Whether it's like they're VC funded, there's community credibility on the line, there's a business model like Cloudflare Workers obviously is offering a great service for people on the edge. Like how do these runtimes balance keeping things standard and trying to make progress and providing people with the value that they're asking for because they've made a choice for that particular runtime?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of times, rightfully so, standards like the official standards approach tends to take way too freaking long for us to actually innovate. And the cycle is like, hey, let's go, work for 3 years on a standard and then implement the damn thing. And by then it's too late and overly complicated and designed by a committee and all that kind of stuff. I hate that approach, right? I've done that approach before, can't stand it. So when I talk about standards, I mean like, hey, let's get something working, right? Then let's iterate on that collectively, right? So we have multiple implementations of that, right? Allow that to evolve over time, and then when we're like, hey, we haven't made any changes to this in a while, we say, okay, that's the standard. That's where it is. So it still gives plenty of room for doing that innovation. Like, with Cloudflare Workers and the Socket API, we shipped that as a feature in the runtime before we had the spec ready for it. Because we needed it. We needed something, right? So we have it there. And yes, if the spec changes, we might need to go back and change that. That's okay. Like we'll handle that. But it allowed us to get some validation that, hey, this is useful. It works, right? We can continue innovating and iterating on it. And in the meantime, we're having the conversations in WinterCG. We're getting feedback from folks, on like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? It's a much more productive approach, right? So when I say standards, I don't mean the formal process. I think I'm done with formal processes for standards as much as possible. So yeah.
Yeah. I think Paul had highlighted another question, which is really good. So, Paul, pick the question of your choice so that James may
Oh my
answer.
goodness.
Putting you on the spot,
I
buddy.
got a good question I wanted to follow up, but
All right, go ahead. No.
we'll let the guests go first. If we got time, we'll get back to my relatively unimportant question. Okay, I'll bring this one up.
Okay.
This is what we are talking about right now, but I think there's a little bit more of an edge to it. I saw someone on Mastodon talking recently about this very topic. And with these alternative runtimes, when they offer something great, but proprietary, there's an issue there about being a part of the bigger ecosystem. I think that's a little bit what this question is about.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, I am not. I have no problem with runtimes innovating on a particular feature and saying, hey, here's something that only works here, right? That is so much faster, so much more, offers so much more capability than we can do anywhere else. And we start competing on what those features are. That's fantastic. That's a great approach. But if it's a general problem, if you know that people like are going to be connecting to a socket, in every runtime, why not? Right? Why not at least coordinate around it so you don't make lives for developers more difficult down the road? So this, what's the reason for working on sanitization? It is, for me at least, it is specifically just to avoid headaches later, to improve the developer experience later. Because we've all experienced code like, if on this environment do this, or like if on this, and it's messy, hard to maintain. It's just a horrible experience for a developer overall, having to maintain all these different branches depending on what environment you're in. So if it's not something that is a specific capability for this runtime that differentiates it, but a general problem, standardize. If it's a specific capability, go for it. Do whatever you want.
I'd say a place where we saw this pattern also is in NPM versus Yarn.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh,
here's
yeah.
a chance to go innovate, be faster, have workspaces. Your lock files don't work with each other, and if one is present and the other one,
Mhm.
and so there's such a thin line between swappability. It's like if you write your project and it only runs on AWS, then you have a barrier to exit, even
Yeah.
though it's written in JavaScript.
Yep. Absolutely. And this goes back to the original, the problem I mentioned is like, if you work on a standard for years and then try to get everybody to do it, you've completely missed the boat. If you can iterate on that, iterate fast, and then come to a consensus over time, right? You're delivering far more value for everyone, including yourselves, right? Now, it may be a bit more work going through that iteration, for the actual runtimes. Could get a little messy depending on what your backwards compatibility requirements are. But overall, it's just a better approach.
Oh yeah, on to the next one.
Oh,
All right, let's see. For a new project, what could be the decision process to pick up a runtime? It really depends what you want to accomplish. For server, like really server heavy workloads, I'm talking like Origin server, not Edge or anything like that. Origin server, you're probably, in enterprise business, you probably still want to stick with Node right now. The reason are all the tooling that's there, the kind of the years of hardening and the security process and the LTS and the observability, all of that stuff that comes along with that Node runtime. That should really still be your choice. Now the other ones are coming along. They're getting there. I think kind of the key determining factor for me would be the level of observability and debuggability that are in there when the application is deployed to the server. But if you're talking like client side, client side tooling, CLIs, that kind of thing, Bun and Deno are fantastic for these. I mean, absolutely great choices. I'm just gonna say, if you want raw performance, nothing's beating Bun right now. Bun is just so much faster. So it really depends on kind of what your specific use case is, right? If you're talking about stuff deployed to the edge, right, and that's where you need it to run. I'm a particular fan of Workers. Use that. There's other options, Fastly. There's other ones out there, but use Workers. But yeah, it's I think it really does depend. But client side, use some of the different ones. Try those out. See if they work for you. Server side, if you need it to be stable long term, I'd still stick with Node right now.
yeah.
And so this is a very related question. I don't think there's much more to add, but just for completeness, I think that's similar to the slotting. You had 3 lanes and you were talking about those lanes, and I'm glad you brought up Workers because we don't talk enough about that lane.
Yeah. Yeah, with the junior developers, I mean, I think the question actually answers itself. I mean,
Sure.
Node has larger ecosystem. Deno brought in a whole new approach that kind of forced the entire ecosystem to think about things a different way, kind of turned the whole small core argument on its head. And Bun, just that raw speed. I mean, it's just you right now you can't really beat it. It's got a long way to go. It's got a long way to go to mature, but it's it's really something special.
Well, can I, since Paul asked a selfish question and kind of jumped the line, I'd like to ask a selfish question. Like, do you think the trend of writing runtimes in a different language than the language that like most folks will be writing that language in? So, in the case of Bun, I'm pretty sure they're using Rust to kind of write
Zig.
the runtime.
They're using
Zig.
Zig.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Zig. Do you think that has legs, or do you think that's the future of runtimes, or do you think that's just kind of like a moment in time until kind of like the JavaScript tooling and runtimes kind of catch up in performance?
People have different opinions on this. For me, it doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
Write it in whatever language you're comfortable in writing it. Whatever that you can feel the most productive in. You know, Zig has a lot of nice features, but it's still a moving target breaking changes and stuff. It's a rough language. Not a lot of people know it. So, that choice to use Zig will limit the number of contributors that can actively participate until that knowledge level rises. Rust, fantastic language. Not my favorite, right? But it has a lot of really nice features. If I had to write in Rust every day, I mean, okay, would I be the happiest? No, but it's there. Same time, like C++, that's what I write every day. Can't stand it. If everything could just be C, right, then I'd be happy. But that plus is definitely not a plus. So, but yeah, I mean, I think whatever language works for you.
I'll jump the line jumper. Who jumped the line jumper? And I'll ask one of my questions, and then give you the standard question we're asking everybody on the way out. On the question about other languages, something in the world of Python's coming up. There is a trend to start writing tooling in Rust, just like in JavaScript, ESBuild, and all these other things in Go or Rust or whatever. But in the world of Python, there's this pushback saying, hey, now you're not going to get very many people contributing to these things anymore. It's Rust.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion on that?
So there's a choice of language for actually implementing things, and that's really arbitrary. There is a choice of language in terms of attracting a community of contributors, right? And this is very intentionally one of the reasons why Node has a large amount of JavaScript paired with a smaller amount of C++. We implement most of the functionality of JavaScript. Why? Well, because we've had thousands of contributors over the years who only know JavaScript. They don't know the C++, and they can materially contribute to the project. We used to do these marathon days where we would bring in an entire room of people at a conference and say, hey, all of you open a PR against Node. It's all just JavaScript. Like, I think the most we ever had one day was like 1,200 pull requests in one day, people making these small changes. One of these events, but it was like, because it's just JavaScript, it's completely accessible. When you make the decision of that language, like what am I going to use? It will impact how you can grow your community. It'll limit who can actively contribute to those things. And that goes all the way down to the choice of standard lib. Like, say if you are using C++, like in Workerd, if you look, we don't use the C++ standard lib. We use a custom standard lib. That decision works for us, but it severely limits like who can actively contribute until they come up to speed on that.
And probably has a change in the bus factor too.
Oh yeah, major
bus factor is going to be a microbus.
Right.
Okay, standard question on the way out, James. We've been talking all day about something WebStorm's thinking a lot about, which is junior developers, junior professionals starting their career, wanting to become senior professionals. Do you have any advice on someone just starting their career?
Get your name out there. Open source. Contribute to open source projects. It doesn't matter which one, right? Start building up that portfolio of things that get you visible. Talk at conferences, meetups, right? Get out there where you're talking about things. And I know blogs aren't as popular, and individual personal blogs aren't as popular as they used to be, but it's a fantastic way of just putting content out there that shows kind of how you think. There's this recent thing on Twitter about hey, don't post to GitHub. We won't look at that. That's BS. Get those contributions, get that history, show there that you are actively capable of working with a community, working with that open feedback, and actually able to code, right? And get that going. And it doesn't matter if it's simple code or like super complicated code. Just get it out there so people can see what you do and start kind of building that visibility for yourself.
Well said.
Very well said. Yep. All right. On that note, James, great conversation, great talk. Hopefully folks can go check out Workerd and Cloudflare Workers. I played around with it. It's awesome stuff. So definitely check that out. Thank you so much. And have a great day. We'll let you go now. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, Shane.